On the morning of June 5, 1943, over the waters off Kolombangara in the Solomon Islands, an 18-year-old boy from California, sitting backwards in the rear seat of a bleeding American dive bomber, picked up his 2-pound radio coil and threw it at a Mitsubishi Zero of the Imperial Japanese Navy. He had 5 seconds to decide. 5 seconds earlier, his twin machine guns had jammed. Not because he fired too much. He only got 5 rounds off before the ammunition belt twisted itself into a knot in the wind. 5 rounds. Against 2 Japanese Zeros. 4 seconds earlier, he looked over his shoulder. The lead Zero was 200 yards behind him, wings rocking side to side. The pilot's way of saying, "I have you." 3 seconds earlier, his pilot yelled something over the intercom. He could not hear it. Engine oil was coating half the canopy. 2 seconds earlier, his hand, the same hand that operated the radio, that gripped a shotgun in California skeet shooting drills a year before, brushed against something heavy. Cold. Copper. 1 second earlier, he realized what it was. A radio coil. 2, maybe 3 pounds. Solid enough to break bone. Now, before we understand the second he made his choice, we have to understand the boy. We have to go back. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, Dick Miralles was a high school kid in California. 17 years old. Skinny. Dark-haired. The kind of boy who spent his weekends with a shotgun in his hands, shooting clay pigeons over open fields. A hobby. Nothing more. By nightfall, he was a boy at war. The radio in his family's home carried the words that changed the country. Pearl Harbor was burning. Battleships were on the bottom of the harbor. More than 2,000 Americans were dead. The Japanese Empire had come, without warning, and struck the United States Navy at anchor. Miralles did not wait for his diploma. He walked out of high school and into a Navy recruiting office. There, he chose the job most men didn't want. Aviation radioman. Second seat of a dive bomber. The gunner. The man who sits behind the pilot, faces the tail, works the radio, and fires the twin machine guns at anything that comes up from behind. The Navy's training method was almost cruel in its simplicity. To teach him how to lead a moving target through the air, they handed him a shotgun. They had him shoot clay pigeons, trap, skeet, over and over, for weeks. That was the entire foundation of the boy who would soon be defending an American dive bomber against the finest fighter aircraft the Japanese Empire could put into the sky. He was assigned to a unit called Carrier Air Group 11. CVG-11 had a home already waiting for it, a famous one. The USS Hornet, the aircraft carrier that, 1 year earlier, had launched Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle and his 16 B-25 bombers on the first American strike against Tokyo. The Hornet was legend, and the Navy had promised her the men of Air Group 11. They never made it aboard. On October 26, 1942, in the waters east of the Santa Cruz Islands, a wave of Japanese carrier aircraft found the Hornet. Val dive bombers came screaming down from altitude. Kate torpedo bombers came low over the water. Bombs, torpedoes, a burning Val out of control, crashing into a superstructure like a suicide missile. A second burning aircraft doing the same. The Hornet came to a dead stop. Fires spread, power died, crews fought for hours to save her. By late afternoon, they abandoned her. That night, 2 Japanese destroyers finished her off with torpedoes. The most famous aircraft carrier of 1942 was gone. Air Group 11 had nowhere to go. There was no other carrier waiting. So the Navy did something unusual. They took a full carrier air group, 88 aircraft, hundreds of pilots and gunners and mechanics trained to operate from a moving flight deck, and they dropped them onto a jungle island. On April 26, 1943, the Wildcats, the Avengers, and the Dauntlesses of Air Group 11 touched down on Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Dick Miralles climbed out of the transport plane, and 18 years old. He looked at his new home: mud, coconut trees, bomb craters, malaria in the air. He was in the war now, and the war had a name: Mitsubishi A6M. The Allies called it the Zero. By the spring of 1943, the Zero was already a legend in the Pacific. It had swept across the South China Sea. It had destroyed American and British aircraft over the Philippines and over Malaya in the opening weeks of the war. Its pilots, men trained for years in the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service, were among the most experienced combat aviators in the world. The numbers told the story. The Zero could reach a top speed of 331 miles per hour. The Dauntless, the aircraft Miralles rode into battle, could barely reach 250. The Zero could climb faster, turn tighter, roll harder. It carried 2 machine guns in the nose, and it carried 2 20mm cannons in the wings, heavy explosive shells, each one capable of tearing an American aircraft apart with only a handful of hits. Against all of that, Dick Miralles had 2 rifle-caliber machine guns, bolted to a swivel mount, feeding from ammunition belts that shook in the slipstream, firing at whatever angle he could twist his upper body to face. The Zeros he would meet were based across a chain of Japanese airfields to the north. Rabaul on New Britain, headquarters of the Japanese 11th Air Fleet. Kahili, near Buin, on the southern coast of Bougainville. Balale, on a small island in the Shortlands. From those fields, the Japanese pilots ran a predictable and brutal script against American dive bombers. Dive from above, rake the tail with bullets, climb back up on the other side, rock the wings, a signal to their wingman and to their enemy that they had located the kill. Turn around, come again. They would repeat this pattern until the American gunner ran out of ammunition, or the American pilot ran out of altitude, or the American plane ran out of engine. Dick Miralles did not know any of this yet, but he knew one thing about the seat he sat in. He knew that he sat backwards. There is a photograph. You can still find it today in the records of the U.S. Naval History Command, of an SPD Dauntless with its rear canopy slid open. In the back seat, twin machine guns point straight out over the tail. This is where Dick Miralles lived, facing backwards. When the aircraft climbed, he saw the earth falling away behind him. When the aircraft dove, at angles approaching 70 degrees, the wind screaming through the perforated dive brakes, he saw the sky above him tilt into nothing, and the ocean or the jungle rushing up to meet the tail. He could not see the target of the bomb his pilot was about to drop. He could not see the anti-aircraft gun that was firing at him. He could not, in fact, see anything the pilot could see. His entire job was to watch the one direction his pilot could not. The 6 o'clock position. Behind. If a Zero came, it came from behind. If a Zero came, Miralles had to see it first. If a Zero came, Miralles had to swing his guns, fight the wind, fight the G-forces, aim through the slipstream, and put rounds into a target moving 300 miles an hour. If his guns worked. For the first few weeks they worked. On April 29, 1943, 3 days after his air group arrived at Henderson Field, his diary logged his first combat mission. Anti-aircraft fire, heavy, survivable. On May 1st, his squadron, recently redesignated from Scouting 11 to Bombing 21, attacked a Japanese camp on the hills of Guadalcanal. Day after day, the pattern set in. Take off from Henderson before the sun was fully up. Fly north up the slot, the long stretch of ocean running between the Solomon Islands. Bomb the Japanese airstrip at Munda on the island of New Georgia. Come home, rearm, sleep, repeat. For a while it was almost routine. Then came May 16th. The target was Munda again. The same Japanese airfield they had been hammering for weeks. On paper, It should have been just another mission. Miralles climbed into the back seat. Same as always. His pilot ran the engine up. The Dauntless rolled down the Henderson Strip and lifted off into the humid Solomon morning. They flew north up the slot in formation. They found the airfield. They rolled in. The dive brakes opened. The Dauntless tipped over into that terrifying, near-vertical dive that defined the aircraft. The dive that gave the men who flew her their gallows nickname. Slow but deadly, his pilot hit the bomb release. Nothing happened. The bomb, 1,000 pounds of high explosive, did not fall. The pilot pulled out of the dive, climbed, rejoined the formation, and that was when the voice came over the radio. It was the skipper, in another Dauntless somewhere above them. He said the words no dive bomber crew ever wanted to hear. Your bomb is teetering on the bottom of your airplane. The bomb had partially released. It was still attached, hanging by some part of the shackle, swinging under the belly of the Dauntless. Every maneuver, every gust of wind, every vibration could shake it loose, and nobody could know whether the arming vanes had already spun, whether it was live, whether the next jolt would detonate 1,000 pounds of high explosive under the aircraft. The skipper gave the order. You can bail out. For a moment, that was the smart choice. Everyone knew it. Get out, deploy the parachutes, let the airplane fly itself into the sea and take the bomb with it. Miralles looked down. They were over open water. Enemy water. Solomon Sea, patrolled by Japanese destroyers, watched by Japanese coast watchers on every occupied island in every direction. And in the water below him, circling in slow, wide patterns, he counted them. Sharks. A lot of them. He had heard the stories. Every American airman in the South Pacific had. Men who bailed out. Men who splashed down into blue water and found that they were no longer alone. He looked at his pilot in the front seat. He made his decision. I'll go with you. The pilot did not argue. He turned the Dauntless back toward Henderson Field. He flew her gently. No sharp turns, no sudden movements. 1,000 pounds of high explosive, live or dead, swinging beneath them the entire way home. They came in, low over Henderson. The tower cleared the area. Every aircraft on the ground moved away from the runway. Every man who wasn't essential took cover. The pilot brought the Dauntless down. The wheels touched. He did not apply the brakes. If the bomb was live, the shock of hard braking could set it off. So he let the aircraft roll down the runway, past the tower, coasting on its own momentum. No way to stop it except with time. Miralles unbuckled his parachute, unbuckled his harness, pulled off his helmet, slid the canopy back all the way, and waited. He waited for the airplane to slow down enough. He would later tell the story with a small, almost embarrassed smile. He said afterwards that he told himself the aircraft was at 10 miles per hour when he jumped, but he admitted the truth. It was probably closer to 5. He climbed out onto the wing, slid off, hit the coral dust of Henderson Field running. He kept running. He did not look back until his legs told him he was clear. When he did look back, his pilot was already 80 feet ahead of him. The bomb never went off. The Dauntless rolled to a stop. Ground crews approached her carefully, one man at a time. He did not have long to think about it. 12 days later, on May 28th, his squadron flew another mission to Munda. Bombing 21 lost 2 aircraft that day. 1 man was killed. Miralles wrote about it that night. It was one of the first times he had put the death of a fellow airman on paper. The squadron went quiet for almost a week, and then came June 5th, Bougainville. Bougainville was the northernmost of the large islands in the Solomon chain. It sat at the top of the slot like a fortress. The Japanese had built airfields at Buin Kahili, at Kara, at Balale, clusters of steel matting and revetments stuffed with Zeros. The Japanese fleet used its harbors to feed reinforcements south. Bougainville was the anchor of everything Japan still held in the Central Solomons. American forces had raided it before, mostly at night, with heavy bombers. This mission was a large daylight strike from Guadalcanal, SBDs and TBFs going in against Japanese shipping, escorted by Corsairs and P-40 Warhawks, flown by Americans and New Zealanders. The Japanese knew Bougainville was worth defending. A large formation of Zeros was up that morning. Miralles pulled himself into the rear seat of a Dauntless in the pre-dark. His pilot climbed into the front. They ran through the checks. The pilot hit the ignition. Flames. The engine caught fire. The two men scrambled out of the aircraft, boots hitting the metal wing, running from a machine that was already dying beneath them. They needed another Dauntless immediately. If they missed the join-up, they missed the whole mission, and worse, they missed the protection of the group. They found a spare aircraft on the ramp, climbed in, started her up, made her live. They took off late, alone, racing to catch a formation that was already climbing north. They made it. Their squadron leader, a lieutenant commander flying a TBF Avenger, in charge of the whole strike, brought Miralles' pilot in as one of his two wingmen. The three aircraft pushed north together, into the sunrise, toward the harbor of an island Miralles had heard of, but never seen. They found Japanese shipping. The lieutenant commander tipped over first. Miralles' pilot rolled the Dauntless in after him, and the moment the dive began, Miralles' machine guns tore themselves free of their mount. Both of them, the twin 30 caliber guns, still loaded, still connected to their ammunition belts, ripped loose from the swivel and started sliding. Miralles grabbed them. He grabbed them because he understood. In the same second, he saw them come loose, what they would do if he let go. Two loaded machine guns tumbling around a diving cockpit at nearly 400 miles per hour. They would smash the canopy. They would strike the tail. They could break control cables. They could kill him and his pilot.
The aircraft all at once.
He held on, and the dive kept going, 70 degrees down. The airspeed climbing, the centrifugal force of the plunging aircraft pulling on everything, not bolted down. It pulled on him. 2/3 of Dick Miralles' body came out of the cockpit. He was hanging outside the aircraft, chest out over the fuselage, arms wrapped around his own machine guns. The Solomon Sea rushing up beneath him at 300 miles an hour, his legs kicking wildly, searching for anything solid. His toes finally caught something. A ring on the floor of the gunner's station. He hooked his feet under it. That was all that held him, his toes. A metal ring, 300 miles an hour. And that was when he saw another Dauntless from his squadron flying past him in the dive. Its dive brakes were not open. You have to understand what that meant. The dive brakes were what allowed the Dauntless to survive its own attack. Perforated flaps that opened out from the trailing edge of the wing, dragging against the air, holding the airplane back from reaching a speed at which it could no longer be pulled out of the dive. That Dauntless's flaps were closed. Miralles had seen it happen in training films. He knew what came next. He watched the other Dauntless accelerate past his own. He watched it keep going. He watched it never come out of the dive. It hit the water at close to 400 miles per hour. There is no way to describe what that looks like. There is no wreckage after an impact like that. There is only foam, and a stain on the surface of the sea, and silence on the radio where a friend's voice used to be. Miralles never learned for certain what killed those men. He suspected the pilot had been hit, that the pilot was already dead or dying, slumped over the controls with the airplane pointed straight down. He suspected it, but he never knew. He had no time to grieve. half out of the airplane, still holding his own machine guns. His pilot pulled out of the dive. They had scored. The bomb from Miralles' aircraft had hit a Japanese ship in the harbor, but there was no cheer in the back seat. There was no radio call of triumph. There was only Miralles dragging himself back into his cockpit, inch by inch, arms burning, and the sound of the engine that had suddenly, quietly, stopped sounding right. He turned his head. He stuck his head out into the slipstream. Oil, warm, black, and heavy. It slapped across his face like a wet hand. It coated his goggles. It filled his mouth. The engine was leaking, badly. Something in the Bougainville harbor, a shell fragment, a rifle round from the ground, a stray burst, had punched a hole through them. They were not going to make it back to Henderson Field. The pilot and Miralles talked it through. On the intercom, the nearest land was a small island held by the Japanese. Landing there meant capture. Capture in the Solomons in 1943 meant torture, and it very often meant execution. The next land was farther south, a larger island called Kolombangara. Kolombangara was also held by the Japanese, but American coast watchers hid in its jungle. They had a network. They rescued downed airmen. The pilot pointed the wounded Dauntless toward Kolombangara. The engine coughed, missed, held. And then, from behind and above, the direction Miralles had spent every mission of his war watching, came the sound he had been trained to fear from the first day he sat down in a back seat. 2 zeros. They had picked him up. Miralles wiped the oil out of his eyes. He swung the twin machine guns around on their mount, the same mount he had wrestled back into place after the dive. He aimed. He led the first zero the way he had been taught, like a clay pigeon in a California field. He squeezed the trigger. He got 5 rounds off. 5. And then the ammunition belt, whipped and tossed by the slipstream during the dive, twisted itself into a knot in the feed tray, and the guns went silent. The first zero rolled in. The zero climbed back up on the other side. Its wings rocked, a signal. The second zero was already coming. Miralles looked around his cockpit. He looked for anything. His guns were dead. To his right knee, sitting in a bracket, was a small metal box. Copper radio coils. 2, maybe 3 pounds of solid metal. Heavy in the hand, dense, sharp-edged. He grabbed them. He would say, later, that he did not have a plan. He would say, later, in his own voice, at a microphone, almost 80 years afterward, the exact words he used at the time. I had to have something to do. He tore the copper coils out of their bracket. He turned in his seat. The second zero was coming down on him. Dick Miralles, 18 years old, gunner in the rear seat of a bleeding American dive bomber, somewhere over the island of Kolombangara on the morning of June 5, 1943, drew back his right arm, and he threw his radio at a Japanese fighter plane. The copper coils tumbled away into the slipstream. He would never know if they hit anything. He suspected they did not. The zeros came back around. They rolled in again. They climbed. They rocked their wings. Miralles had one thing left. He had the radio itself. The transmitter, the part he had not thrown, the part still bolted to the airframe. He grabbed the handset. He pressed the button. He called for help on the fighter guard channel. He said the words every American airman in the Pacific had memorized. We need help. Somewhere above him, somewhere in the same crowded sky, 2 American pilots heard him. They were flying F-4U Corsairs. They were United States Marines. They had already been in the fight. They had already burned through most of their ammunition, covering the strike. They turned toward Miralles. They dove. And the Zeros, the 2 Zeros, who had been playing with the crippled Dauntless, taking their time, wearing him down, saw them coming. They knew what a Corsair was. Every Japanese pilot in the Solomon Islands by June of 1943 knew what a Corsair was. They knew the aircraft. They knew the reputation. They knew that in a straight fight, the Corsair had the advantage in almost every measure that mattered. The Zeros broke off. They rolled away. They dove for the sea. They ran. Miralles watched them go. His hands shook on the useless guns. Oil still dripped from his goggles. His engine still coughed. But nobody was shooting at him anymore. His pilot nursed the dying dauntless south, past Kolombangara, all the way to the Russell Islands, small islands north of Guadalcanal that the Americans had taken earlier that year. They landed there, wheels down, engine barely alive. That evening, in the chow line at the Russell Islands base, Miralles found the two Marine Corsair pilots who had saved his life. He wanted to thank them. He asked them how many rounds they had left when the Zeros ran. One of them told him, 50. Miralles looked at the second pilot. The second pilot looked back. He was already out, empty, bone dry, not a single bullet left in any of the 6 machine guns of his Corsair. The Zeros had run from 2 American fighters who could not have shot back. Dick Miralles sat down at that mess table on the Russell Islands, June 5th, 1943, and understood something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. He had not survived because of his skill. He had not survived because he had thrown a radio. He had survived because 2 Japanese pilots, 500 feet above him, had assumed that the 2 American fighters diving toward them still had ammunition. That was all. That was the only thing. He was 18 years old, and when the PBY flying boat came the next morning to pick him up and fly him back to Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, he had no idea what was waiting for him in his tent. The PBY came in low over the water the next morning. It set him down at Henderson Field. He walked back to his own tent. He pushed the flap aside. It was empty. Not empty in the way a tent is empty when the men are out flying. Empty in the way a tent is empty when the men have decided nobody is coming back. His footlocker had been opened. His clothes were gone. His pay from that month. The letters from home he had folded and kept under his mattress. The small personal things a boy carries with him when he leaves California for the other side of the world. All of it gone. Because in Air Group 11, in the summer of 1943, there was an unwritten rule. When a man did not come back, his friends divided his belongings before nightfall. There were reasons for it. Clothes wore out fast in the Solomons, jungle rot, insects, salt water, and a dead man's shirt was better than no shirt at all. If the personal effects went home to a mother in Ohio or a wife in Pennsylvania, they went home with the officer's letter, and nobody wanted to add to that letter. Nobody wanted her to open a package and find the boy she remembered inside it. So they divided the belongings, they wore them, they spent the money, and they moved on. Because the next morning, there would be another mission and another empty cot, and the war did not stop for grief. Miralles had been listed as lost. He stood in the middle of the tent that had been his home for 6 weeks, and he understood what his crewmates had seen when they woke up that morning without him. They had seen a boy who had gone out over Bougainville with a lieutenant commander and 2 wingmen and had not come back. They had seen his squadron mates go into the water. They had assumed the rest. He went looking for his things. He walked from tent to tent. He asked. He found a man wearing his shirt. He found another man who had taken his cash. He got most of it back, though not all of it. Some of what he had brought from California was already spent, or ruined, or too far gone to matter. He would tell that story decades later, with the same small, embarrassed smile he used for the sharks and the bomb and the radio. They took what they wanted, he would say. I didn't have anything left. That was Dick Miralles, welcome back from the dead. He did not have long to sit with it. Air Group 11 was still flying. The Central Solomons campaign was still burning through aircraft and men at a pace that did not slow for anyone. Bombing 21 got Miralles into a replacement, Dauntless. They gave him a new machine gun mount. They sent him back into the sky. June 19. His squadron flew north again, hunting Japanese shipping in the slot. They found nothing. They came home with the bombs still on the racks. June 26th. Munda. Again. His pilot pickled the bomb. The Dauntless pulled out of the dive. And this time, as they climbed away from the target, Miralles did something the war would never celebrate, but that every rear seat gunner in the Pacific understood. He opened up with his own guns. He was strafing down at the Japanese airstrip as his pilot leveled out and ran for the sea. Miralles hosed the ground with his twin 30s. Anti-aircraft crews, fuel dumps, anything that moved. It was ugly work. It was low altitude, close in, personal work. And it was what Air Group 11 needed. July 6th, another Japanese airstrip. Heavy flak, the kind of anti-aircraft fire that filled the sky with black flowers of smoke and threw shrapnel through the air like handfuls of gravel. As his pilot pulled out of the dive, Miralles picked out a specific gun position on the ground. He led it, the way he had led clay pigeons in California, the way he had led the Zero over Kolombangara. He fired. The Japanese guns stopped firing. That was his kill. Not a Zero, not a fighter. A single anti-aircraft position that had been trying to kill him. He wrote it in his diary that night. July 17th, the Great Bougainville shipping strike. Air Group 11 and a joint force of Marines went in against Japanese ships in Bouin Harbor. 7 B-24s, 37 Dauntlesses, 35 Avengers, more than 100 fighters overhead. A Japanese destroyer was sunk. 2 more were damaged. Miralles rode the dive backwards, watching the sky, watching the Zero scatter as the Corsairs came down on them from above. July 25th, his last combat mission. By now, American infantry, the Army's 25th and 43rd Divisions, the Marines, were closing on the Munda airfield. The bombing runs of Air Group 11 had softened it for months. The Japanese knew the field was lost. It would fall to American ground forces exactly 11 days later, on August 5th, 1943. Miralles wrote in his diary that night. He was quiet about it, the way he was quiet about most things. He noted that the ground troops were nearly in complete control. He noted the date. He did not know it was his last combat mission. 3 days later, July 28th, was Dick Miralles' 19th birthday. His commanding officer walked over. He handed the boy a piece of paper. It was a ticket home. Air Group 11's 4-month tour on Guadalcanal was ending. Someone in Washington had decided the men had done enough. In 4 months, they had flown against every major Japanese position from Munda to Bougainville. They had lost aircraft and men in every phase of the campaign. Dick Miralles had not shot down a single Zero. He was not an ace. He was not a hero on any list the Navy kept. He had, however, done something the Navy did not have a citation for. He had lived. A day or two after his 19th birthday, Dick Miralles walked to the airstrip at Henderson Field. He climbed aboard a transport aircraft. He looked back at the coconut palms and the mud and the coral dust runway that had been his home. The transport lifted off. He watched Guadalcanal disappear behind him. He would not sit in a Dauntless again for 79 years. The rest of the war moved him around, the way the Navy moved men. He was assigned to a small escort carrier, the USS Hoggett Bay, and he served on her through the closing years of the Pacific War. He supported flight testing in Hawaii after the fighting stopped, and when the Empire of Japan surrendered on the deck of the USS Missouri in the summer of 1945, Dick Miralles was still alive. He went home to California. He did not stay in aviation. He walked into the offices of the California Department of Forestry, an agency that in later years would come to be known as Cal Fire. And he signed on to fight fires. He would do it for 30 years. He would spend the rest of his working life on the ground wearing a different kind of uniform, walking into a different kind of enemy. Wildfires in the summer hills, structure fires in the winter, the smoke and the exhaustion and the split-second decisions of men who go where other men run away from. He wrote a book about all of it later. He called it War and Fire, the two great subjects of his life. Both of them fought against something that burned. He did not talk much about Bougainville. He did not tell many people about the radio. His wife knew. His son knew. A few close friends knew. But it was not a story he led with. He was of a generation of men who came home from the Pacific and did not want to be defined by 4 months in a jungle in 1943. He wanted to raise his children. He wanted to fight fires. He wanted to be a man in his own quiet country. The years passed. The men of Air Group 11 began to die. One by one, the pilots, the gunners, the radiomen, the ground crews, the names in Miralles' diary, the men who had divided up his clothes when they thought he was dead, the men who had covered him in corsairs, the men who had shared the mess table with him on the Russell Islands. Those men grew old, and then they were gone. By 2022, only one member of Carrier Air Group 11, who had flown against the Japanese in the Solomons in 1943, was still alive. His name was Dick Miralles. He was 98 years old. He lived in Sacramento. And then, one afternoon, the telephone rang. The people on the other end of the line were from the Commemorative Air Force. It was an organization of pilots and mechanics and volunteers who kept a handful of Second World War aircraft alive and airworthy. Mustangs and course
Wildcats.
And one, only one, restored SPD Dauntless dive bomber. They had a proposal for him. They wanted him to fly it, not as a passenger, not in the front. They wanted him to sit where he had sat in the war, the back seat, facing backwards. They wanted him to open his old logbook, the same logbook that carried the entries from Munbunda and Bougainville and the last flight of July 1943, and add one more line to it. Miralles thought about it. He said yes. On September 24, 2022, at an airfield in Peachtree City, Georgia, a 98-year-old man climbed slowly up onto the wing of a restored SPD Dauntless. Volunteers helped him at the elbow. A younger pilot, a man named Peter Haig, waited in the front cockpit. Haig had grown up dreaming about the Dauntless. Now he was going to fly one, with a man who had actually been in the back seat over Bougainville. Miralles settled into the rear cockpit. He faced the tail.
The same way he had 79 years earlier.
Peter Haig ran the checks. The old Wright Cyclone engine turned over, coughed, and caught with a deep, rumbling growl that had not been heard in that airframe in decades. The Dauntless taxied to the runway. She lifted off. Haig flew her the way an old man deserved. Gentle turns first, then steeper ones, 60 degrees. And then, at Miralles' request, a wing-over, nose up, roll onto the back, roll down the other side. Then Haig said the words, "Do you want to do a dive?" Miralles' voice came back over the intercom. "Let's go." Peter Haig picked a target on the ground below. He rolled the Dauntless up on one wing. He pushed her over. The nose came down. The world tilted. For the first time in 79 years, Dick Miralles rode the dive of an SPD Dauntless. No bombs, no zeros, no oil on his face. Just the wind and the engine and the memory. Haig pulled her out. He climbed back to altitude. He asked Miralles how he was doing. The old man laughed. Again, they did it again. When they landed, Peter Haig taxied the Dauntless back to the ramp. Volunteers helped Miralles down from the wing. Someone brought out his logbook, his actual logbook. the same brown, faded volume that had ridden with him on Guadalcanal. They opened it, and there, on one of its pages, was the last entry Miralles had ever written in it, in the summer of 1943. Munda, July, 1940 up. He wrote a new line, right underneath. September 24th, 2022. SBD Dauntless. Flight time, 1.0 hours. Pilot, Lieutenant Haig. 2 entries, 2 pilots, 2 flights, 79 years apart, on the same page. Peter Haig handed the logbook back to Miralles. He shook the old man's hand. He said the only thing he could think to say. He told him it was an honor. Miralles smiled at him. He said the flight had been calm. He said it had been much calmer than what he was used to. In July of 2024, 4 days before his 100th birthday, at the California State Capitol in Sacramento, the United States Navy gave Dick Miralles the medals he had earned as a boy and never received. The Distinguished Flying Cross with 3 gold stars, the Air Medal for the 1st through 14th Strike Flight, 85 combat missions over Guadalcanal and the Central Solomons. He took the medals in his hands. He looked at the room. He said the only words he could think to say. I accept these for all of those that didn't make it back. 1 year later, in November of 2025, Richard Dick Miralles died at his home in California. He was 101 years old. With his death, the last surviving combat veteran of Carrier Era Group 11, the men who had lost the USS Hornet before they ever boarded her, who had fought from the mud of Guadalcanal, who had flown into the guns of Bougainville and Munda and Kolombangara, was gone. The men in the diary were all gone now. The 2 Marine Corsair pilots who had come out of the sun with empty guns and saved a stranger's life were gone. The 2 Japanese Zero pilots who had turned and run were gone too, somewhere on some other side of the same ocean, buried in some other country's memory. The only thing left is what Dick Miralles told us himself. He told us the story. He told us on tape, in his own voice, in his own kitchen, and in his own hangar, and eventually in the back seat of a restored Dauntless in Georgia. He told us about the sharks in the water. He told us about the bomb that would not fall. He told us about the pilot who was 80 feet ahead of him on the runway. He told us about the SBD from his squadron going straight down without dive breaks. He told us about the oil on his face. He told us about the guns that jammed after 5 rounds. He told us about the copper coils in his hand. And when the interviewer asked him, decades later, softly, honestly, why he had thrown them, why he had reached for a radio and hurled it at a Japanese fighter plane, Dick Miralles gave the same answer he had given every time anyone had ever asked. I don't know why I did it. I had to have something to do. That was all. That was the whole thing. An 18-year-old boy from California sitting backwards in a burning airplane over an ocean full of enemies with a jammed gun and a 2-pound piece of copper in his hand, and no plan at all except the refusal to sit still while somebody tried to kill him. He threw it. He lived. He came home. He fought fires for 30 years. He kept the logbook. And when the country that sent him to war asked him, 79 years later, if he wanted to sit in that back seat one more time, he said yes. He said, again, rest easy, Dick. The rest of us have the watch.